Hello, welcome back to Insomnia History, where we uncover the darkest and most thrilling stories from the past to light up your night. Before we descend into scandal and shadow, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring the bell, because every click helps us keep digging deeper into the forgotten corners of history. Now, let's travel back to the glittering court of King Louis XIV, where behind the powdered wigs and golden halls, a deadly secret was brewing. Fortune tellers, poisoners, black masses, and whispers of human sacrifice. The affair of the poisons wasn't just a scandal, it was a web of murder and occultism that nearly shook the throne of France. Are you ready for a tale where power and poison walk hand in hand? Let's get started. France, in the late 1600s, existed in a peculiar state of contrast. On one hand, it represented the pinnacle of European enlightenment and culture. On the other, it harbored a shadowy underworld where ancient superstitions and modern ambitions collided with deadly consequences. At the center of this world stood one man, Louis XIV, the Sun King, whose 72-year reign remains the longest of any major European monarch. Louis ascended to the throne at the tender age of 4 in 1643, though he wouldn't take full control of the government until 1661, following the death of Cardinal Mazarin. The France he inherited had been weakened by the 30 Years' War and the civil conflict known as the Fronde. These experiences left the young king with an unshakable determination to centralize power and prevent any future challenges to royal authority. By the 1670s, Louis had transformed France into Europe's dominant military and cultural power. His approach to governance could be summarized in his famous declaration, "L'État, c'est moi, I am the state." This was not mere arrogance, but reflected his belief in the divine right of kings, that God had personally appointed him to rule France, making any opposition not just treasonous, but sacrilegious. The physical embodiment of Louis's power was the Palace of Versailles. What began as a hunting lodge was transformed under his direction into the most magnificent royal residence in Europe. By 1682, Versailles would become the official seat of the French government, housing not only the royal family, but thousands of nobles and their servants. The palace served a strategic purpose beyond its obvious grandeur. It kept the nobility close where Louis could monitor them, transforming formerly independent aristocrats into courtiers competing for royal favor. Life at Versailles followed elaborate rituals that revolved entirely around the king. Nobles fought desperately for the honor of participating in the lever and coucher, the ceremonies of the king's waking and retiring. Even passing the king a shirt or holding a candlestick became coveted privileges that could signal one standing at court. The most intimate bodily functions of the monarch became matters of state and ceremonial importance. Behind the gleaming facades and manicured gardens of Versailles lurked a cutthroat social environment. Nobles bankrupted themselves trying to maintain appearances, wearing fortunes on their backs in the form of embroidered clothes and priceless jewels. Status was everything, and the line between relevance and obscurity could be crossed in a single misstep or a whispered word in the wrong ear. French society in the 17th century operated under a rigid class structure. At the top sat the first and second estates, the clergy and nobility, representing less than 2% of the population, but controlling vast wealth and privilege. The third estate comprised everyone else, from wealthy merchants to destitute peasants. While social mobility existed in limited forms, birth largely determined destiny. For nobles, maintaining one's position became an all-consuming obsession. Marriage in aristocratic circles had little to do with romantic notions of love. Unions were strategic alliances designed to consolidate wealth, land, and power. Many nobles found themselves trapped in loveless marriages arranged by ambitious parents. Women, in particular, had few options once wed. Divorce was virtually impossible, and legal separation remained exceedingly rare. For a noble lady facing an unwanted husband, the imagination might turn to more permanent solutions. The practice of poisoning had a long history in Europe. Unlike violent methods of murder, poison offered several advantages to the would-be assassin. It could be administered gradually, mimicking natural illness. It required no physical strength. Most importantly, it could be deployed with minimal risk of detection, as medical science lacked reliable means to identify most toxic substances. In an era before forensic toxicology, a careful poisoner might never face justice. Common poisons of the era included arsenic, often called inheritance powder for obvious reasons, belladonna, hemlock, and various metallic compounds. Knowledge of these substances circulated in both scholarly texts and folk traditions. Apothecaries and herbalists sold potentially deadly compounds with minimal oversight. A determined individual with the right connections could easily acquire the means to commit murder. The widespread belief in the supernatural provided another avenue for those seeking to change their circumstances through illicit means. Despite the Catholic Church's efforts to stamp out pagan practices, folk magic remained deeply embedded in French culture. Even educated elites consulted astrologers and fortune tellers. Love potions, curses, and protective charms found eager customers at all levels of society. Paris, with its narrow streets and crowded neighborhoods, harbored countless practitioners of the occult arts. Fortune tellers, alchemists, and self-proclaimed witches operated openly, serving clients from all social classes. Their services ranged from the innocuous, like predicting the sex of unborn children, to the sinister, including curses intended to cause illness or death. Many practitioners functioned as early psychologists, offering advice and a sympathetic ear to troubled souls. The Catholic Church held enormous influence over French society, yet its relationship with folk magic remained complicated. While officially condemning witchcraft and sorcery, many priests incorporated elements of folk belief into their practices. The line between religious miracles and magical workings often blurred. Some clergy even participated in occult rituals, especially those involving prayer and sacred objects repurposed for personal gain. Beneath the surface of Louis's glittering court simmered constant power struggles. The king's favor could elevate a family to unprecedented heights, or consign them to irrelevance. Courtiers plotted endlessly to advance their positions, forming and breaking alliances with dizzying speed. For women, whose direct political power remained limited, influence often came through romantic relationships. The king's mistresses wielded enormous unofficial authority, controlling access to the monarch and influencing his decisions. Françoise Athénaï, Marquise de Montespan, became Louis's official mistress in 1667, displacing Louise de la Vallière. Ambitious and intelligent, Montespan bore the king 7 children and established herself as a cultural trendsetter and political force. Her rise exemplified the fluid nature of power at Versailles, where formal titles sometimes meant less than personal connections. Her story would later become entangled with the unfolding scandal in ways that threatened the very foundations of the monarchy. The court's factions extended beyond romantic rivalries. Religious tensions between the devout and the libertine created another fault line. The king's own brother, Philippe, Duke of Orléans, openly kept male favorites and dressed in women's clothing, scandalizing conservative elements at court. Ministers competed for influence, with figures like Jean-Baptiste Colbert and François-Michel Le Tellier, Marquis de Louvois, using their departmental authority to build personal power bases. Against this backdrop of intrigue, ambition, and moral flexibility, the conditions were perfect for scandal. The spark that would eventually ignite the affair of the poisons came in 1676, with the trial of a noblewoman whose crimes shocked even the jaded sensibilities of Parisian society. Her case would reveal a shadowy underworld that reached from the gutters of Paris to the gilded halls of Versailles. Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray, Marquise de Brinvilliers, belonged to a wealthy family of the noblesse de robe, the aristocracy of the judicial system. Beautiful and well-connected, she had been married at age 21 to Antoine Gobelin, Marquis de Brinvilliers, in a union arranged to consolidate family fortunes. The marriage proved unhappy from the start. Antoine gambled away much of their wealth and engaged in numerous affairs, leading Marie-Madeleine to seek comfort elsewhere. She found it in the arms of Gaudin de Sainte-Croix, a charismatic cavalry officer introduced to her by her own husband. Their passionate affair continued for years, even after Marie-Madeleine's father, Antoine d'Aubray, had Sainte-Croix briefly imprisoned in the Bastille in an attempt to end the relationship. This interference would prove fatal for the elder d'Aubray, as his daughter and her lover plotted revenge. During his imprisonment, Sainte-Croix had shared a cell with an Italian chemist named Exili, who taught him the art of preparing untraceable poisons. Upon his release, Sainte-Croix shared this knowledge with Marie-Madeleine. Together, they formulated a plan that would eliminate her disapproving family members while simultaneously enriching her through inheritance. Marie-Madeleine first tested her poisons on patients in Paris hospitals, visiting the sick while posing as a charitable noblewoman. Once confident in her lethal mixtures, she turned her attention to her father. She arranged for a servant loyal to her cause to be employed in her father's household. Through this accomplice, she administered poison to Antoine d'Aubray over several months. He died in agonizing pain in 1666, the true cause of his illness unsuspected. Emboldened by success, Marie-Madeleine targeted her two brothers next, killing them using similar methods between 1670 and 1672. With each death, her inheritance grew. She might have continued her murderous career indefinitely had fate not intervened. In 1672, Sainte-Croix died suddenly of natural causes. He had left instructions for a box containing incriminating letters and poison recipes to be delivered to Marie-Madeleine in the event of his death. Instead, authorities seized the box, and its contents revealed the couple's crimes. Marie-Madeleine fled to England, then to a convent in Liège, but was eventually captured and returned to Paris. Her trial in 1676 captivated public attention and horrified the court. Under torture, she confessed to patricide and fratricide. The details that emerged painted a picture of cold-blooded calculation that seemed almost incomprehensible coming from a woman of noble birth and refined upbringing. The Marquise de Brinvilliers was sentenced to torture by water, forced to drink 16 pints of water, beheading, and having her body burned. Her execution on July 17, 1676, drew enormous crowds. Before dying, she made a full confession, claiming that half the people of quality are involved in this sort of thing, and I could ruin them if I were to talk. This ominous statement hinted at a much larger conspiracy lurking beneath the surface of Parisian society. The Brinvilliers case shocked France, but it proved to be merely the prelude to a far greater scandal. The threads unraveled during her investigation would soon lead authorities to a vast underground network of poisoners, fortune-tellers, abortionists, and practitioners of black magic. This shadowy world catered to clients from all social classes, including members of the highest nobility with direct access to the king himself. Louis XIV recognized the threat these revelations posed to public order and the reputation of his court. In response, he appointed Nicolas de la Reynie, the first lieutenant general of police for Paris, to investigate the matter thoroughly. What began as a follow-up to a sensational murder case would soon explode into the most significant criminal investigation of the century, threatening to topple ministers, royal favorites, and perhaps even the monarchy itself. La Reynie, methodical and incorruptible, would soon uncover a conspiracy so vast and so shocking that special measures would be required to protect the king and the institution of monarchy from its fallout. The affair of the poisons was about to begin. The story of Marie-Madeleine d'Aubray, Marquise de Brinvilliers, reads like a dark fairy tale. Born in 1630 to one of the wealthiest families in Paris, she enjoyed every privilege that wealth and noble status could provide. Her father, Antoine Drouot d'Aubray, held the prestigious position of civil lieutenant of Paris, making him one of the most powerful legal officials in the city. From all outward appearances, Marie-Madeleine seemed destined for a life of comfort and respectability among the Parisian elite. At age 21, Marie-Madeleine married Antoine Gobelin, who bore the title Marquis de Brinvilliers. The match pleased both families, uniting two considerable fortunes and securing Marie-Madeleine's social position. Antoine brought a distinguished name and connections at court, while Marie-Madeleine contributed a substantial dowry. On paper, it was an ideal, aristocratic union. Reality proved considerably less idyllic. Antoine quickly revealed himself as a profligate gambler and womanizer who showed little interest in either his wife or managing their combined fortune. By most accounts, Marie-Madeleine initially attempted to be a dutiful wife, despite her husband's indifference. The birth of their children briefly seemed to stabilize the marriage, but Antoine's continued infidelities and financial recklessness soon created an unbridgeable distance between them. The pivotal moment in Marie-Madeleine's life came when her husband introduced her to a handsome cavalry officer named Gaudin de Sainte-Croix d'Alway. The exact circumstances of this introduction remain somewhat mysterious. Some accounts suggest Antoine himself encouraged the relationship out of indifference to his marital vows. Others propose more cynical motives, suggesting he hoped to distract his wife while he pursued his own pleasures. Whatever the intention, the introduction proved catastrophic. Marie-Madeleine and Sainte-Croix began a passionate affair that would continue for years. Unlike her cold marriage, this relationship consumed Marie-Madeleine completely. Contemporaries described Sainte-Croix as extraordinarily charming, intelligent, and magnetic. Despite his title and military rank, he came from modest origins and lacked the fortune needed to maintain his aristocratic lifestyle. His combination of social ambition and financial desperation would prove deadly. Antoine Drouot d'Aubray, Marie-Madeleine's father, watched his daughter's moral decline with growing alarm. As civil lieutenant of Paris, he was responsible for maintaining public order and had no intention of allowing scandal to touch his family. When the affair became impossible to ignore, he took decisive action. Using his considerable legal authority, he obtained a lettre de cachet from the king, a royal warrant that allowed imprisonment without trial. In 1663, Sainte-Croix was arrested while riding in Marie-Madeleine's carriage and taken directly to the Bastille. The humiliation of this public arrest infuriated both lovers. Marie-Madeleine never forgave her father for this interference. During his imprisonment, which lasted only a few months, Sainte-Croix shared a cell with an Italian expatriate named Exili, described variously in historical records as an alchemist, apothecary, or professional poisoner. Exili had reportedly worked for Queen Christina of Sweden before being expelled from her court under suspicion of poisoning. During their shared confinement, he taught Sainte-Croix the art of preparing untraceable poisons. These were not crude toxins that killed quickly and obviously, but subtle compounds that produced symptoms resembling natural illness. Arsenic, antimony, and various plant-based toxins formed the foundation of this lethal knowledge. Témoignages from the Bastille. Sainte-Croix immediately reconnected with Marie-Madeleine. Their relationship had now transformed from a mere romantic affair into a criminal partnership fueled by revenge and greed. Saint-Croix shared his newly acquired knowledge of poisons, and Marie-Madeleine proved an eager student. They began to formulate a plan that would eliminate her disapproving family members while simultaneously enriching her through inheritance. Before turning her deadly skills against her family, Marie-Madeleine conducted a series of gruesome experiments to perfect her techniques. She visited Hotel du Hospital, ostensibly on charitable missions, bringing food and wine to the sick. These gifts often contained various poisons, allowing her to observe their effects firsthand. She meticulously noted which compounds worked most effectively and which produced symptoms that most closely resembled natural illness. The death toll from these experiments remains unknown. Confident in her lethal arsenal, Marie-Madeleine turned her attention to her father. She arranged for a servant named Jean Hamelin, nicknamed La Chaussée, to be employed in her father's household. Through this accomplice, she administered poison to Antoine Dro Dobré over several months. The elder Dobré suffered terribly, experiencing violent stomach pains, vomiting, and extreme thirst. His physicians, lacking any concept of toxicology, attributed his symptoms to natural disease. He died in agonizing pain in 1666. The murder accomplished two of Marie-Madeleine's goals simultaneously. She had exacted revenge against the man who had humiliated her by having her lover imprisoned, and she had secured a substantial inheritance. The perfect crime might have satisfied most criminals, but the Marquise and her lover had developed a taste for murder. More importantly, larger fortunes awaited if her brothers could be eliminated as well. The next targets were Marie-Madeleine's two brothers, Antoine and François Dobré. The elder brother had succeeded their father as civil lieutenant of Paris, making him a particular threat to the murderous couple. Using the same servant, La Chaussée, as their instrument, they poisoned both brothers during a dinner at Antoine's country estate in 1670. François died relatively quickly, while Antoine lingered for several months before succumbing in June 1670. With the deaths of her father and brothers, Marie-Madeleine became the principal heir to the Dobré fortune. She and Saint-Croix now enjoyed considerable wealth and freedom from family interference. Their perfect crimes might have remained undiscovered had fate not intervened in an unexpected way. In July 1672, Saint-Croix died suddenly while working in his laboratory. The exact cause remains uncertain. Some accounts suggest he accidentally poisoned himself by dropping his glass mask while preparing toxic compounds. Saint-Croix died without a will, leading authorities to seal his laboratory and belongings. Among his possessions, they discovered a small red box with a note instructing that it should be delivered to the Marquis de Brinvilliers in the event of his death. Curious officials opened the box instead. Inside, they found letters from Marie-Madeleine explicitly discussing their crimes, along with various vials of poison and instructional notes on their preparation and use. The discovery sent shockwaves through Parisian society. The Marquise, learning that her crimes had been exposed, fled immediately. She first escaped to England, then to Liège, where she sought sanctuary in a convent. French authorities issued warrants for her arrest and dispatched an officer named Desgrais to apprehend her. Desgrais employed an elaborate ruse, posing as a love-struck nobleman to gain access to the convent. He successfully captured Marie-Madeleine and returned her to Paris to face justice. The trial of the Marquise de Brinvilliers began in April 1676. It captivated public attention, unlike any criminal proceeding in recent memory. Here was a woman of high birth and refined education accused of the most heinous crimes imaginable. Not just murder, but patricide and fratricide. The combination of aristocratic status, sexual scandal, and cold-blooded calculation proved irresistible to public fascination. Evidence against Marie Madeleine included the papers found in Sainte Croix's red box, testimony from La Chaussée, who had been arrested and executed before her trial, and her own confession extracted under torture. The water torture, a standard interrogation technique of the era, involved forcing the accused to drink massive quantities of water, causing extreme distension and pain. Under this duress, Marie Madeleine confessed to poisoning her father and brothers. On July 16, 1676, the Parliament of Paris pronounced her guilty of multiple murders. Her sentence reflected the gravity of her crimes. She would undergo public amende honorable, a ritual of public humiliation and apology. Torture by water, beheading, and having her body burned and the ashes scattered. The execution would take place at the Place de Grève, Paris's traditional execution ground, where the Hôtel de Ville stands today. The execution on July 17 drew enormous crowds. Marie Madeleine, dressed in the simple white shift of the condemned, was transported to Notre Dame Cathedral for the amende honorable. There, barefoot and holding a burning torch weighing 2 pounds, she was forced to publicly confess her crimes and beg forgiveness from God, the King, and justice. From there, she proceeded to the Place de Grève for the final acts of her punishment. Before her execution, Marie Madeleine made a full confession to her priest, reportedly claiming that half the people of quality are involved in this sort of thing, and I could ruin them if I were to talk. This ominous statement suggested that her crimes, shocking as they were, represented merely the visible portion of a much larger criminal ecosystem. She maintained remarkable composure throughout her final ordeal. Witnesses reported that she arranged her hair so the executioner's blade would have a clean stroke, and managed to kneel upright without assistance for the fatal blow. After her beheading, her body was burned as sentenced, and her ashes scattered to the winds. The spectacle of an aristocratic woman meeting such an ignominious end reinforced the crown's message that no one, regardless of birth or status, stood above the king's justice. Yet, Marie Madeleine's final cryptic statement about people of quality left an unsettling question hanging over Paris. Were there more aristocratic poisoners operating in the shadows? The case might have ended there, remembered only as a particularly lurid episode in Parisian criminal history. However, the investigation had uncovered troubling connections to a broader underworld of fortune-tellers, alchemists, and self-proclaimed sorcerers. These practitioners supplied not just poisons but love potions, abortion services, and various magical rituals designed to bring wealth, power, or romantic success. Louis XIV recognized the potential threat these revelations posed to public order and the reputation of his court. In January 1677, just months after the Brinvilliers execution, he appointed a special commission to investigate what appeared to be a sprawling criminal conspiracy involving poison and black magic. This commission would eventually become known as the Chambre Ardente, burning chamber, named for the black draped room lit by torches where it conducted its proceedings. At the head of this investigation stood Nicolas Gabriel de la Reynie, France's first lieutenant general of police, appointed by Louis in 1667 to bring order to Paris's chaotic streets. De la Reynie had established himself as an incorruptible administrator with a methodical approach to law enforcement. He had introduced street lighting to Paris, earning lamps the nickname Lanternes de la Reynie, reorganized the night watch, and implemented modern policing techniques that made the capital significantly safer. La Reynie approached the poison investigation with the same thoroughness that characterized his reform of Parisian policing. He began by ordering the arrest of anyone known to have supplied materials to Sainte Croix or the Marquise. His officers infiltrated the demi-monde of fortune-tellers and alchemists, gathering intelligence on their practices and clientele. As they pulled on these threads, a vast and disturbing network began to emerge. The most significant breakthrough came in March 1679, with the arrest of Marie Bosse, a fortune teller who had drunkenly boasted at a dinner party that she had helped many wives rid themselves of unwanted husbands. During a search of her home, authorities discovered suspicious powders and potions. Under interrogation, Bosse implicated numerous other practitioners, including a woman who would become the central figure in the unfolding scandal, Catherine Deschays, known professionally as La Voisin. La Voisin operated the most successful consulting business in Paris, offering services that ranged from fortune-telling and astrology to procurement of poisons and performance of magical rituals. Her clientele included some of the highest-ranking members of French society. Her arrest on March 12, 1679, opened the floodgates. During her interrogation, she named dozens of accomplices and hundreds of clients, many from the upper echelons of the aristocracy. As La Rainie's investigation progressed, the emerging picture grew increasingly disturbing. What had begun as an inquiry into poisoning was expanding to encompass infanticide, satanic rituals, and plots against the king himself. Most alarmingly, the evidence pointed directly at the royal court, implicating figures in Louis's immediate circle. The affair of the poisons was about to shake Versailles to its foundations and test the absolute power of the Sun King himself. La Rainie, a loyal servant of the crown, now faced an impossible dilemma. His duty compelled him to follow the evidence wherever it led. Yet, that same evidence threatened to implicate persons so highly placed that pursuing them might damage the monarchy itself. The methodical police chief would need all his skill and discretion to navigate the treacherous waters ahead, where the currents of justice and political necessity pulled in opposite directions. Paris, in the late 17th century, was a city of stark contrasts. While the grand boulevards and elegant public squares showcased Louis XIV's vision of urban renewal, the old medieval quarters remained labyrinths of narrow streets and crowded tenements. In these shadowy neighborhoods, far from the glittering halls of Versailles, an elaborate underground economy thrived, catering to the darkest desires of Parisians from all social classes. At the center of this shadowy world stood Catherine Deschays, known professionally as La Voisin. Born around 1640 to modest circumstances, Catherine started her career as a midwife, gaining intimate knowledge of female anatomy and herbal remedies. When financial difficulties threatened her family, she expanded her services to include fortune-telling, gradually building a reputation as a gifted clairvoyant. By the 1670s, she had transformed herself from a struggling midwife into the proprietor of Paris's most successful occult consulting business. La Voisin's primary residence on Rue Beauregard became a destination for Parisians seeking supernatural solutions to worldly problems. The house itself reflected her success, featuring elegant furnishings and artwork that created an atmosphere of respectable mysticism. She received clients in a specially designed consultation room where carefully orchestrated effects enhanced her supernatural persona. A black draped table, crystal balls, and astrological charts created the appropriate atmosphere, while hidden compartments and clever devices allowed for convincing magical demonstrations. Far from operating as a lone practitioner, La Voisin stood at the apex of an extensive criminal enterprise. Her organization included specialized personnel for every aspect of her business. Fortune tellers and physiognomists provided the initial consultations, assessing clients' needs and financial resources. Chemists and herbalists prepared potions, powders, and poisons according to specific requirements. A network of agents gathered information about potential clients, allowing La Voisin to appear supernaturally informed about their private affairs. Most disturbingly, the organization included defrocked priests who performed blasphemous ceremonies for clients seeking magical intervention. Chief among these was Etienne Guibourg, a 60-year-old cleric who had abandoned his vows to participate in La Voisin's lucrative enterprise. Geburgs specialized in the Black Mass, a perverted version of Catholic liturgy that invoked Satan rather than God. These ceremonies involved sacrilege against consecrated hosts and often included human sacrifice, particularly of unbaptized infants. The operation maintained strict compartmentalization, with many lower-level operatives unaware of the full scope of activities. Street vendors sold love potions and minor charms, never knowing when their customers were being groomed for more expensive and sinister services. Midwives who provided abortion services might refer wealthy clients to La Voisin without understanding the true nature of her business. This structure protected the organization's leadership and allowed the network to survive even when individual members were arrested. La Voisin's client list spanned Parisian society, from servant girls seeking love potions to duchesses plotting to eliminate rivals. Her genius lay in creating a tiered service model that could accommodate any budget or moral flexibility. For modest fees, clients received simple fortune-telling, horoscopes, or harmless herbal remedies. Those with deeper pockets and darker intentions could purchase increasingly dangerous and illegal services, from abortions and love potions containing toxic ingredients to custom-made poisons designed to mimic natural illness. A typical consultation began innocuously enough. Clients would arrive seeking guidance about their futures, particularly regarding love, money, or advancement. La Voisin, one of her associates, would perform a basic divination, often using palmistry, card reading, or scrying with a mirror or crystal. During this initial reading, the practitioner would skillfully extract information from the client, identifying their deepest desires and frustrations. For clients expressing dissatisfaction with their marriages, La Voisin might suggest a simple charm or potion to revive a spouse's affections. If the client hinted at more desperate measures, the conversation could turn to powders of succession, a euphemism for poisons designed to eliminate inconvenient husbands. These poisons would be described in coded language as solutions that would free the client from their difficulties or change their circumstances without explicitly mentioning murder. La Voisin employed several expert poison makers, most notably a woman named Marie Bosset and a man called Christopher Glaser, who had published a respected treatise on chemistry. Their poisons typically contained arsenic, antimony, or plant-based toxins like belladonna and aconite. These were carefully formulated to produce symptoms resembling common illnesses, with dosages calibrated to cause either sudden death or gradual decline depending on the client's preference. The most expensive poisons left no visible traces and produced symptoms indistinguishable from natural disease. For aristocratic clients seeking more exotic solutions, La Voisin offered ceremonies designed to harness supernatural forces. These ranged from relatively benign rituals to conjure wealth or attract lovers to the infamous Black Mass, which promised to fulfill any desire, no matter how impossible, through direct appeal to Satan. These ceremonies combined elements of Catholic liturgy, pagan traditions, and pure theatrical invention designed to impress and terrify participants. The most elaborate Black Masses took place in secluded locations like abandoned chapels or La Voisin's specially constructed chamber in her country house at Villeneuve-sur-Gravois. The ceremony required specific components: a defrocked priest to perform the rites, an altar often formed by the naked body of a young woman, consecrated hosts stolen from churches, and sometimes the blood of sacrificial victims. Clients would present written petitions detailing their requests, which would be read aloud during the ceremony and supposedly delivered directly to the devil. Evidence gathered during La Rainey's investigation suggests that these ceremonies occasionally involved infanticide. Unwanted babies, particularly those born from clandestine liaisons or failed abortion attempts, were killed during these rituals, their blood used in magical concoctions or as offerings. Lavoisin allegedly maintained a crematorium in her garden specifically for disposing of these tiny bodies. Later testimony would claim that over 2,500 infants met this fate, though modern historians consider this number greatly exaggerated. While male clients certainly patronized Lavoisin's establishment, women constituted the majority of her clientele. This gender disparity reflected the limited options available to women in 17th century France. Trapped in arranged marriages, denied legal independence, and valued primarily for their reproductive capacity, many women saw magic as their only recourse against oppressive circumstances. Lavoisin and her fellow practitioners exploited this vulnerability, positioning themselves as champions of female empowerment while extracting substantial fees. Clients from the aristocracy approached Lavoisin through an elaborate system designed to maintain secrecy and deniability. Initial contact might be made through trusted servants or companions. Meetings often occurred at night, with noble clients arriving in unmarked carriages and wearing masks or veils to conceal their identities. Lavoisin sometimes used safe houses for these high-profile consultations, ensuring that her most prestigious clients never had to risk being seen at her main residence. Money flowed freely through this shadowy economy. Lavoisin's services commanded premium prices, with complex rituals costing upwards of 100 louis d'or, equivalent to several years' wages for an ordinary worker. She lived lavishly, wearing expensive clothes adorned with jewels and maintaining multiple properties. Financial records discovered after her arrest indicated that she earned approximately 100,000 livres annually, millions in today's currency, making her one of the wealthiest non-nobles in Paris. Beyond financial transactions, the network operated on a complex economy of secrets and blackmail. Lavoisin collected compromising information about her clients as insurance against betrayal. A client who purchased poison to eliminate a spouse became forever vulnerable to exposure. Similarly, aristocrats who participated in black masses could never risk revealing Lavoisin's activities without implicating themselves in blasphemy and potential infanticide. This mutual assured destruction helped maintain the network's security for decades. The organization maintained connections with other criminal enterprises in Paris. Robberies could be commissioned to acquire specific items needed for rituals, particularly consecrated hosts and church vessels. Brothel keepers supplied women for ceremonial purposes or to satisfy clients' more earthly desires. Even members of the city watch were corrupted, ensuring that authorities looked the other way when suspicious activities occurred at known locations. Several competitors operated similar, smaller operations throughout Paris. Marie Bosse ran her own consulting business before becoming Lavoisin's associate. Marie Vigoureux specialized in love magic and aphrodisiacs. Adam Lesage, a self-proclaimed alchemist, offered services to transmute base metals into gold, while actually specializing in elaborate confidence schemes. These practitioners occasionally collaborated, but also competed fiercely for wealthy clients, sometimes sabotaging each other through anonymous denunciations to authorities. Most clients sought relatively mundane assistance, love potions to recapture straying spouses, fertility treatments, gambling luck, or career advancement. For these requests, practitioners provided largely harmless solutions. Herbal preparations with suggestive names, ritual objects to be carried or placed in specific locations, or simple incantations to be recited at prescribed times. The psychological effect of these treatments often produced results convincing enough to maintain the practitioners' reputations. More sinister requests required more extreme measures. Clients seeking to eliminate rivals might purchase poisons designed for different methods of administration. Arsenic could be mixed with food or drink, while other preparations might be applied to clothing, particularly undergarments, where they would be absorbed through the skin. The most expensive poisons were designed to be undetectable by taste or smell, and to produce symptoms matching common illnesses of the era. The network also provided abortion services at a time when terminating pregnancy carried both legal and religious penalties. Lavoisin and her associates employed various methods, from herbal preparations and physical manipulations to more dangerous surgical interventions. These services were particularly sought by unmarried women or those involved in extramarital affairs, including members of the aristocracy who needed absolute discretion to preserve their reputations and sometimes their lives. One of the most disturbing aspects of Lavoisin's operation was the coldly transactional approach to murder. Assassinations were treated as straightforward business arrangements, with different price points depending on the target's status and the method required. The organization maintained a cadre of specialized poisoners who could infiltrate households as servants, delivering toxic substances over time to mimic prolonged illness. For particularly difficult targets, they might employ more direct methods, arranging accidents or apparent robberies gone wrong. When clients requested supernatural assistance against enemies, Lavoisin offered various magical attacks. These ranged from simple hexes intended to cause illness or misfortune to elaborate ceremonies designed to summon demons who would torment or kill the targeted individual. While the efficacy of these magical assaults remains dubious, the psychological impact on both client and target could be significant, especially in a society where belief in supernatural forces remained widespread. The Black Mass represented the most extreme service offered by Lavoisin's network. These ceremonies combined elements of Catholic liturgy with inverted symbolism and explicitly satanic elements. An altar would be prepared, often consisting of a naked woman lying on her back holding black candles. A consecrated host, stolen from a church, would be placed on her body, typically on her stomach or genitals. A defrocked priest would then perform a blasphemous parody of the Mass, reciting prayers backward and invoking Satan instead of God. Etienne Guibourg served as the primary celebrant for these ceremonies, with Abbé Mariette and other fallen priests occasionally performing as well. During the ritual, the client would present a written petition detailing their request, usually for wealth, power, the death of an enemy, or the love of a specific person. This petition would be read aloud at the climax of the ceremony and supposedly delivered directly to Satan, who would grant the request in exchange for the client's devotion. The most notorious Black Masses allegedly involved blood sacrifice. In some cases, chalices of blood from sacrificial animals or even infants would be used in place of sacramental wine. These ceremonies typically took place at night in secluded locations, abandoned churches, remote country houses, or specially constructed chambers in the homes of the practitioners. Participants often wore masks or hoods to conceal their identities, even from each other, providing additional security against exposure. As La Reynie's investigation would later reveal, some of the most elite members of French society had allegedly participated in these ceremonies. Rumors implicated figures with direct access to the king, including his official mistress, Athénais de Montespan. The political implications of these connections would eventually force Louis XIV to make difficult decisions about how far the investigation could proceed without threatening the stability of his regime. The network's reach extended beyond Paris into the French countryside and even to foreign countries. Provincial agents supplied rare ingredients for potions and poisons, while connections with criminal organizations in Italy and Spain facilitated the movement of people and materials across borders. This international dimension made the complete eradication of the network virtually impossible, as operatives could simply relocate when pressure from authorities became too intense. Most disturbingly, Lavoisin's operation maintained connections with legitimate society through corrupted professionals. Certain physicians provided medical knowledge and access to restricted substances. Apothecaries supplied chemical compounds without asking questions about their intended use. Even some members of the clergy participated, either by providing stolen sacramental items or by performing blasphemous ceremonies for substantial fees. The investigation, launched by Nicolas de la Reynie in 1677, began pulling at these threads, gradually unraveling a criminal enterprise that had operated with impunity for decades. What started as an inquiry into a single poisoning case had expanded to encompass a vast network of practitioners, offering services ranging from simple fortune-telling to murder and satanic rituals. As La Reynie's officers made arrests and extracted confessions, the trail led inexorably toward the highest levels of French society, threatening to implicate members of the king's inner circle. The fate of Lavoisin and her associates now hung in the balance, as did the reputations of countless aristocratic clients. Louis XIV would soon face difficult decisions about how far to allow the investigation to proceed and how to balance justice against the stability of his regime. The affair of the poisons had moved beyond a simple criminal investigation to become a political crisis, threatening the foundations of absolute monarchy itself. Nicolas Gabriel de la Reynie stands as one of the most remarkable figures in French legal history. Born to minor nobility in 1625, he had risen through administrative ranks to become Paris's first lieutenant general of police in 1667. Under his leadership, Paris had transformed from a chaotic medieval city into a relatively orderly modern capital. He had introduced street lighting, reorganized the night watch, established fire brigades, and created France's first professional police force. Methodical, incorruptible, and fiercely loyal to the crown, La Reynie embodied the ideal of the enlightened bureaucrat, serving an absolute monarch. When Louis XIV charged him with investigating the poison trade following the Brinvilliers case, La Reynie approached the task with characteristic thoroughness. He began by examining the papers confiscated from Sainte Croix and establishing connections between known poisoners. His officers questioned apothecaries and chemical suppliers throughout Paris, creating a detailed map of who purchased suspicious substances and in what quantities. This methodical approach soon yielded results, revealing patterns of distribution that pointed toward organized criminal activity rather than isolated incidents. The breakthrough came in March 1679 with the arrest of Marie Bosse, who had unwisely boasted while intoxicated that she had helped numerous women rid themselves of unwanted husbands. A search of her home revealed incriminating materials, and under interrogation, she implicated several other practitioners, including Lavoisin. Within days, La Reynie's officers had arrested Lavoisin, Marie Vigoureux, and other key figures in the Parisian underground of fortune-tellers and poison vendors. The scale of the conspiracy quickly became apparent as prisoners, facing torture and execution, began implicating others. Each arrest led to new names, new locations, and evidence of increasingly disturbing crimes. What had begun as an investigation into poisoning expanded to encompass infanticide, sacrilege, and treason. La Reynie meticulously documented each confession and cross-referenced testimonies, building an intricate map of criminal connections that stretched from the poorest neighborhoods of Paris to the chambers of Versailles itself. Recognizing the extraordinary nature of the case, Louis XIV established a special tribunal in April 1679 to handle the proceedings. Officially named the Chambre de l'Arsenal after its location in the Paris Arsenal, it soon became known as the Chambre Ardente, burning chamber, due to the black draperies and constantly burning torches that created its somber atmosphere. This name also evoked the tribunals historically used to try heretics, reflecting the blasphemous nature of many crimes under investigation. The Chambre Ardente operated under extraordinary judicial procedures that bypassed normal legal protections. Sessions were conducted in absolute secrecy, with judges sworn to confidentiality. Defendants had no right to legal representation and could be held indefinitely without formal charges. Most significantly, the tribunal could authorize torture as an investigative technique rather than merely as punishment. These exceptional powers reflected both the seriousness of the crimes and the king's determination to root out the poison network completely. Louis appointed trusted officials to the tribunal, including several state councillors and masters of requests. The commission was initially headed by Louis Boucherat, who would later become Chancellor of France. La Reynie served not as a judge, but as the chief investigator, responsible for gathering evidence, conducting interrogations, and presenting findings to the tribunal. This separation of investigative and judicial functions represented an early example of modern criminal procedure, though embedded within an absolutist framework. The investigation employed various techniques that would become standard in modern policing. La Reynie's officers conducted systematic surveillance of suspected locations, monitoring who entered and left establishments known to provide occult services. They employed informants within the criminal underworld to gather intelligence on the poison trade. Most innovatively, they created detailed dossiers on suspects and their associates, establishing connections through careful documentation rather than relying solely on confessions. Interrogation remained the primary investigative tool, however, and the methods employed reflected the harsh judicial practices of the era. Initial questioning might begin gently, with investigators offering leniency in exchange for cooperation. For recalcitrant suspects, psychological pressure would increase, including isolation and sleep deprivation. Those who continued to resist faced judicial torture, authorized by the tribunal and administered according to strict protocols that, paradoxically, reflected the bureaucratization of brutality under state authority. The primary torture methods included the brodequins, leg screws that crushed the legs between wooden planks, and the question d'eau, water torture, in which massive quantities of water were forced down the victim's throat. These procedures were carefully documented, with scribes recording every question, response, and application of increased pressure. Many suspects confessed under such duress, though modern analysis suggests skepticism about the reliability of testimony extracted through torture. La Voisin proved remarkably resistant to interrogation, maintaining her composure even under torture. She admitted to fortune-telling and providing harmless remedies, but initially denied involvement in poisoning or infanticide. Only after weeks of questioning and confrontation with testimony from her associates did she begin to reveal details of her operation. Even then, she carefully modulated her confessions, admitting to certain crimes while deflecting questions about her high-ranking clients. As the investigation progressed, La Reynie established a comprehensive understanding of the poison network structure. La Voisin emerged as the central figure, but numerous other practitioners operated either in cooperation with her or as independent competitors. Adam Lesage, a self-proclaimed alchemist and one of La Voisin's lovers, provided detailed testimony about magical ceremonies and the preparation of poisons. Marie Vigoureux, another fortune teller with a wealthy clientele, revealed connections to aristocratic households. With each new arrest and confession, the web of complicity expanded. The most disturbing testimony came from Etienne Guibourg, the elderly defrocked priest who had performed black masses for La Voisin's clients. Under interrogation, he described ceremonies conducted over the naked bodies of young women, using consecrated hosts and the blood of sacrificed infants. He claimed to have performed such rituals for numerous aristocratic clients, including Most shockingly, Athenaeus de Montespan, the king's official mistress and mother of 7 of his children. According to testimony from multiple sources, Montespan had first approached La Voisin around 1667 when she sought magical assistance to win Louis's affections away from his previous mistress, Louise de la Vallière. After successfully becoming the king's favorite, she allegedly continued to employ magical means to maintain her position, particularly as younger rivals appeared at court. The most serious accusations suggested that she had participated in black masses where consecrated hosts were placed on her naked body, while Guibert performed blasphemous rituals intended to maintain the king's love. Even more alarming were allegations that Montespan had purchased powders to be administered to the king, supposedly aphrodisiacs, but potentially poisons. Given that access to the king's food was strictly controlled, such accusations carried implications of conspiracy within the royal household itself. If true, these claims would mean that those closest to Louis had been involved in plots against his person, potentially threatening the stability of the monarchy. When La Reynie brought these accusations to Louis's attention in a private audience, the king faced an unprecedented dilemma. The evidence implicated the mother of his children and numerous prominent courtiers. Making these allegations public would create a scandal that could undermine faith in the monarchy itself. Yet allowing guilty parties to escape justice contradicted Louis's belief in his divine responsibility to uphold God's law on earth. Louis's response reflected both pragmatism and principle. He ordered the investigation to continue, but established new protocols for handling evidence involving members of the court. Testimony implicating individuals of high rank would be reported directly to him through written memoranda prepared by La Reynie and reviewed by Louis alone. The king would then decide personally which cases would proceed to the Chambre Ardente and which would be handled through other means. This procedural change allowed Louis to maintain control over politically sensitive aspects of the investigation, while ensuring that the criminal network itself would be dismantled. La Reynie continued his methodical work, arresting dozens of fortune tellers, alchemists, and poison vendors throughout Paris. By the end of 1679, most of the network's operational capacity had been destroyed, though the full extent of aristocratic involvement remained concealed from public view. Why? The investigation revealed that poisoning had become disturbingly commonplace in certain circles. La Reynie's records document over 1,000 individuals implicated in purchasing or administering poisons, though many cases involved love potions or abortifacients rather than murder weapons. Aristocratic households emerged as particular hotbeds of poisoning activity, with servants often enlisted to administer toxic substances to targets over extended periods to mimic natural illness. Beyond the practical aspects of poisoning, the investigation uncovered a complex belief system blending Catholic theology, folk magic, and deliberate sacrilege. Many clients genuinely believed in the efficacy of magical rituals, viewing them as alternative pathways to achieving desires thwarted by conventional means. Others approached such services with cynical pragmatism, seeing them as elaborate covers for very practical crimes like murder and political sabotage. The Chambre Ardente processed cases with remarkable efficiency, despite the complexity of the crimes involved. Between 1679 and 1682, the tribunal examined 442 individuals and issued 367 arrest warrants. Of those brought before the court, 218 were imprisoned, 36 were executed, and 5 were sentenced to life as galley slaves. Others received lesser punishments, ranging from banishment from Paris to public penance. Some suspects died in prison awaiting trial, while a fortunate few received royal pardons, typically due to political considerations rather than questions of guilt. La Voisin's fate was decided relatively early in the proceedings. After extensive interrogation failed to extract a complete confession, she was convicted based on available evidence and testimony from her associates. On February 22, 1680, she was taken to the Place de Grève, strangled, and her body burned at the stake. Contemporary accounts report that she maintained her composure to the end, neither confessing fully nor naming her highest-ranking clients. With her death, the central figure in the poison network was eliminated, though her secrets regarding aristocratic involvement partially died with her. Following Lavoisin's execution, the investigation entered a new phase focusing on her associates and clients. Adam Lesage, her former lover and accomplice, provided extensive testimony about magical ceremonies and aristocratic clients in hopes of saving himself from execution. The Abbé Guibourg detailed the black masses he had performed, including those allegedly conducted for Madame de Montespan. Lavoisin's daughter, Marguerite Montvoisin, offered particularly damaging testimony about her mother's high-ranking clientele, perhaps motivated by a desire for revenge against those who had abandoned her to her fate. By mid-1680, the investigation had reached the highest levels of French society. The Duchess of Bouillon, Marie-Anne Mancini, niece of the late Cardinal Mazarin, was interrogated regarding consultations with Lavoisin, though she cleverly deflected the most serious accusations. The Countess of Soissons, Olympe Mancini, another of Mazarin's nieces and a former love interest of Louis himself, fled to Brussels rather than face questioning. François-Henri de Montmorency, Duke of Luxembourg, and one of France's most distinguished military commanders, spent several months in the Bastille before being released without formal charges. As the circle of suspicion widened to include more prominent figures, political considerations increasingly influenced the proceedings. Louis recognized that allowing the investigation to continue unchecked risked destabilizing his court and providing ammunition to foreign propagandists already eager to portray his regime as corrupt and tyrannical. The spectacular nature of the crimes, particularly the black masses and alleged infanticide, could undermine the moral authority of the monarchy if too closely associated with the royal entourage. The turning point came in July 1681, when Louvois, the Minister of War and one of Louis's most trusted advisors, presented the king with a comprehensive assessment of the political risks posed by continuing the investigation. Louvois argued that further revelations would do more damage to the monarchy than the crimes themselves, particularly given the dubious reliability of testimony extracted under torture. He recommended sealing the most sensitive records and handling remaining cases through regular courts or administrative action, rather than the extraordinary tribunal. Louis, after careful consideration, largely accepted this advice. In July 1682, he formally dissolved the Chambre Ardente, ending the special legal regime that had governed the investigation for 3 years. He ordered the most sensitive documents sealed and placed in his personal archives, where they would remain inaccessible for centuries. Ongoing cases were transferred to regular courts, while some suspects were dealt with through letters de cachet, royal warrants that allowed indefinite imprisonment without trial. The decision to curtail the investigation reflected Louis's pragmatic balancing of justice against political necessity. While genuinely committed to eradicating the poison trade, he recognized that a complete accounting would implicate too many people essential to his government. By allowing La Reynie to dismantle the operational infrastructure of the network while shielding certain highly placed individuals from public exposure, Louis maintained both the reality and appearance of royal justice, while avoiding a potentially destabilizing scandal. La Reynie, the consummate royal servant, accepted the king's decision without public protest, though his private papers suggest he remained troubled by the incomplete nature of the investigation. He continued as Lieutenant General of Police until 1697, implementing numerous reforms to prevent the reemergence of organized poison networks. These included strict regulations on the sale of toxic substances, regular inspections of apothecaries and herbalists, and ongoing surveillance of fortune tellers and other occult practitioners. The practical effects of the investigation proved significant despite its premature conclusion. The organized poison trade in Paris was effectively dismantled, with most practitioners executed or imprisoned. New regulations made access to toxic substances considerably more difficult. Perhaps most importantly, the public spectacle of aristocratic involvement in the scandal created a powerful deterrent against future poisoning conspiracies, as potential clients became warier of practitioners who might implicate them under pressure. As for Madame de Montespan, the most prominent figure implicated in the investigation, her position at court gradually declined following the scandal, though Louis never publicly acknowledged the accusations against her. By 1691, she had been effectively displaced as royal favorite by the piously religious Madame de Maintenon. Ironically, a woman Montespan herself had introduced to court as governess for her children with the king. While multiple factors contributed to this fall from grace, the shadow of the poison affair undoubtedly played a significant role. The legacy of La Reynie's investigation extended beyond its immediate consequences. The meticulous documentation of criminal networks, the systematic gathering of evidence, and the creation of comprehensive case files established precedents for modern police work. The specialized tribunal, with its emphasis on professional judges rather than aristocratic amateurs, represented an important step toward a rationalized judicial system. Even the controversial use of torture was subjected to bureaucratic procedures that, paradoxically, reflected the emerging modern state's attempt to regulate the application of violence. More broadly, the affair of the poisons marked a crucial moment in the evolution of Louis XIV's absolute monarchy. The king's handling of the scandal demonstrated both the extent and limits of his power. He could establish extraordinary tribunals, order arrests without traditional legal protections, and personally decide which cases would proceed. Yet even the Sun King found himself constrained by political necessity and the practical impossibility of pursuing justice without regard for consequences. As the investigation wound down in 1682, the full truth about aristocratic involvement in poisoning and black magic remained concealed. Louis had protected his court from public scandal while still punishing many of the most egregious offenders. The sealed records would remain largely inaccessible until the French Revolution, when revolutionaries eager to expose the corruption of the ancient regime would rediscover the dossiers that Louis had hidden away. By then, a century would have passed, and the affair of the poisons would seem like a distant nightmare from a more superstitious age. Among the most shocking revelations of La Reynie's investigation were the detailed accounts of blasphemous ceremonies conducted for aristocratic clients. The Black Mass, or Messe Noire, emerged as the dark heart of the affair of the poisons, combining elements of religious sacrilege, infanticide, and sexual depravity that horrified even the hardened investigators of the Chambre Ardente. These ceremonies represented not merely criminal acts, but a fundamental inversion of the sacred order upon which Louis XIV's Catholic monarchy rested. The concept of the Black Mass had existed in European folklore and theological writings for centuries before the events in Paris. Church authorities had long accused heretical groups of conducting inverted rituals that mocked Christian sacraments. However, most scholars considered such accounts to be largely fictional, designed to demonize religious dissidents rather than describing actual practices. La Reynie's investigation provided the first well-documented evidence that such ceremonies were indeed being performed, not by theological revolutionaries, but by individuals seeking material gain through supernatural means. According to testimony from multiple witnesses, the Black Mass followed a structure deliberately perverting Catholic liturgy. While the traditional Mass celebrates Christ's sacrifice and the miracle of transubstantiation, the Black Mass invoked Satan through deliberate desecration of sacred objects and spaces. The ritual required three essential elements: a defrocked or corrupted priest to perform the ceremony, consecrated hosts stolen from churches, and an altar typically formed by the naked body of a woman lying on her back. Etienne Guibourg emerged as the primary celebrant of these dark rituals. Born around 1610, Guibourg had been ordained as a Catholic priest, but had abandoned his vocation to pursue occult practices. By the time of the affair of the poisons, he was an elderly man with decades of experience in forbidden rituals. Under interrogation, he provided detailed descriptions of numerous black masses he had performed for Lavoisin's clients, including the most sensational claim that he had conducted such ceremonies for Madame de Montespan herself. The basic structure of the Black Mass, as described by Guibourg and other witnesses, began with preparations that inverted normal religious practice. While Catholic priests prepared for Mass through prayer and ritual purification, celebrants of the Black Mass deliberately engaged in sacrilegious acts to desecrate themselves. The ceremonial space would be prepared with black draperies, inverted crucifixes, and strange symbols drawn on the floor or walls. Candles made from human fat or black wax provided illumination, creating an atmosphere of otherworldly dread. The central altar for these ceremonies consisted of a woman lying naked on her back. For the most important rituals, this role required a young, beautiful woman, preferably a virgin, though in practice, women with connections to the underworld frequently served this function. Lavoisin's daughter, Marguerite Montvoisin, testified that she had been used as the altar for certain ceremonies beginning when she was just 12 years old. The woman would lie with her arms outstretched in a cruciform position, holding black candles, with a bowl or chalice placed on her abdomen or between her thighs. The most essential element of the Black Mass was the consecrated host, stolen from a church where it had already been blessed through proper Catholic ritual. The theft of these hosts constituted a serious crime in itself, as they were believed to have been transformed into the literal body of Christ through transubstantiation. Witnesses described an underground trade in stolen hosts, with church employees sometimes bribed to provide them for occult practitioners. Some hosts were kept for extended periods, accumulating power through continued desecration. The ceremony itself began with the corrupted priest reciting prayers, often in Latin as in traditional Mass, but altered to invoke demonic forces rather than God. Some accounts suggest prayers were recited backwards, while others indicate more sophisticated alterations that maintained the rhythmic structure of liturgical language while inverting its meaning. Throughout the ritual, traditional gestures of reverence would be performed toward the woman's body rather than toward the altar, as in a proper Mass. At some point during the ceremony, the client would present a written petition detailing their request. These petitions typically sought love, wealth, power, or the death of enemies. The document would be read aloud as part of the ritual and then supposedly delivered to Satan through magical means. Some accounts describe the petition being burned in the flame of black candles, while others suggest it was placed on the woman's body alongside the desecrated host. The most disturbing accounts describe the use of blood during these ceremonies. In some cases, this allegedly came from sacrificed animals, but multiple witnesses testified to the use of human blood, particularly from infants. Lavoisin was accused of maintaining a regular supply of unwanted babies, primarily from unmarried mothers who had unsuccessfully sought abortions. These infants, according to testimony, would be sacrificed during the ceremony, their blood collected in the chalice, placed on the woman's body, and later used in the creation of magical powders and potions. Marguerite Montvoisin provided particularly detailed testimony about these sacrifices, claiming that her mother maintained a special room at their house in Villeneuve-sur-Gravois specifically for this purpose. She described a stone altar with drainage channels for blood and a small oven where bodies were disposed of afterward. While modern historians debate the reliability of such testimony, given that it was often extracted under torture, the consistency of accounts from multiple witnesses suggests that some form of infanticide did occur. in connection with these ceremonies. The sexual element of the Black Mass varied according to the specific ritual and client. In some cases, the ceremony concluded with ritual copulation between the client and either the altar woman or other participants. This act, performed in a consecrated space in the presence of desecrated holy objects, represented the ultimate transgression against Catholic moral teaching. Other accounts describe more elaborate sexual activities involving multiple participants, sometimes including the priest himself. Though Guibourg's advanced age makes some of these claims questionable. The most notorious Black Masses were allegedly performed for Madame de Montespan beginning in the late 1660s, when she sought to win Louis XIV's affections. According to testimony from Guibourg and others, Montespan participated in these ceremonies by serving as the altar herself, lying naked with the chalice placed on her body, while Guibourg performed the ritual over her. The petition in these cases specifically requested the king's love and the elimination of rivals for his affection. Subsequent ceremonies reportedly included more sinister elements, as Montespan sought to maintain her position against younger rivals. Witnesses described rituals involving powders made from the ashes of burned hosts mixed with blood from sacrificed infants, intended to be placed in the king's food. Whether these substances were genuine love potions or actual poisons remains unclear, as does the question of whether they were ever successfully administered to Louis. The Abbé Guibourg provided particularly detailed testimony about 3 Black Masses he claimed to have performed for Montespan. In the first, she allegedly lay naked on the altar while he recited the incantation, Astaroth, Asmodeus, princes of friendship, I conjure you to accept the sacrifice of this child for the things I ask of you. He then sacrificed an infant, collected its blood and entrails, and later combined them with the bones of toads, teeth from moles, powdered iron, dust from human remains, and consecrated hosts to create a love powder. In another ceremony, Guibourg claimed that Montespan recited the following invocation: I ask for the friendship of the king and the Dauphin, that it continue, that the queen be barren, that the king leave her bed, and her table leave her bed and her table from me, that I obtain from him all I ask for myself and my relatives. This petition explicitly targeted Queen Marie-Thérèse, Louis's legal wife, revealing the ruthless ambition behind Montespan's supernatural endeavors. A third ceremony allegedly involved the sacrifice of a child purchased specifically for the purpose. According to Guibourg, he slit the infant's throat, drained its blood into the chalice placed on Montespan's body, and then dismembered the corpse. Parts of the body were preserved for use in subsequent magical preparations, while the remainder was burned in Lavoisin's special oven. The ceremony concluded with Guibourg and Montespan engaging in ritual sex upon the altar. Though many historians question this detail, given Guibourg's age and physical condition, while Montespan's case attracted the most attention due to her proximity to the king, many other aristocrats allegedly participated in similar ceremonies. The Countess of Soissons, the Duchess of Bouillon, and the Duke of Luxembourg were all implicated in patronizing occult practitioners for various magical services, though whether they participated directly in Black Masses remains less clear. The widespread involvement of nobility suggested a profound moral crisis at the heart of Louis's court, where external piety masked private blasphemy. Beyond the Black Mass, Lavoisin and her associates offered various other magical rituals tailored to specific client needs. Love magic represented a significant portion of their business, ranging from simple herbal preparations and incantations to elaborate ceremonies involving personal items from the desired individual. Hair, nail clippings, or bodily fluids from the target would be incorporated into charms or potions, following the sympathetic magic principle that maintaining a connection to part of a person provided power over the whole. For clients seeking wealth or career advancement, Rituals often involved the creation of talismans or pacts with demonic entities. Adam Lesage specialized in ceremonies, promising to reveal hidden treasures, typically conducting elaborate rituals in remote locations that culminated in the client signing a blood pact with a demon. While these ceremonies produced no actual supernatural effects, they functioned as elaborate confidence schemes, with practitioners staging apparent magical phenomena, using accomplices and practical trickery. Rituals designed to harm enemies took various forms depending on the client's specific desires. Simple hexes might involve creating a wax effigy of the target, which would be manipulated or damaged to cause corresponding harm to the actual person. More elaborate ceremonies called upon demons explicitly to torment or kill the targeted individual. In practice, these magical attacks often coincided with physical ones, as clients might commission both a curse and a poisoning, each reinforcing the effectiveness of the other in the client's mind. Practitioners like Lavoisin understood the psychological aspects of their ceremonies, designing rituals that created powerful emotional experiences for participants. The combination of forbidden sexuality, religious transgression, and apparent contact with supernatural forces produced altered states of consciousness that clients interpreted as evidence of magical efficacy. The setting, typically at night, in specially prepared chambers, lit only by candles, enhanced the sense of entering an otherworldly realm where normal rules and limitations did not apply. The individuals who performed these ceremonies came from various backgrounds, but shared certain characteristics. Many had religious training that they had abandoned or perverted. Geborg had been a legitimate priest before turning to occult practices. Abbé Mariette, another clerical participant, had studied for the priesthood, but apparently never completed his ordination. Their religious knowledge allowed them to create convincing inversions of Catholic ritual that maintained the structural elements while subverting the meaning. Other practitioners came from medical or scientific backgrounds. Christopher Glaser had published legitimate works on chemistry before becoming involved in manufacturing poisons. Some midwives expanded their practice from childbirth to abortion, and eventually to infanticide for ceremonial purposes. This merging of practical knowledge with occult beliefs characterized much of the network, allowing them to offer services that combined physical effects through poisons or herbs with psychological manipulation through ritual. The clients who sought these dark ceremonies represented various motivations and degrees of belief. Some genuinely accepted the efficacy of black magic, viewing it as an alternative pathway to desires thwarted by conventional means. Others approached such services with cynical pragmatism, seeing the ceremonies as elaborate covers for very practical crimes like murder and political sabotage. For aristocratic clients, participation in forbidden rituals also offered a thrilling transgression against the rigid moral and religious codes that governed public life at court. The location of these ceremonies varied according to their nature and the client's status. Lavoisin maintained a special chamber in her house for routine magical consultations, but more elaborate or dangerous rituals typically occurred at her country property in Villeneuve-sur-Gravois. For high-ranking clients concerned about discretion, ceremonies might take place in abandoned churches, remote chateaux, or even in private rooms within aristocratic residences. The most sensitive rituals for clients like Montespan allegedly occurred in secured locations with minimal witnesses. The timing of ceremonies followed both practical and symbolic considerations. Many rituals took place at night, both for secrecy and for symbolic association with darkness and the demonic. Certain ceremonies required specific astronomical conditions, such as the new moon or particular planetary alignments. Others corresponded to the inverted Catholic calendar, with the most powerful black masses performed on significant feast days or during Holy Week, maximizing their blasphemous potency through deliberate contradiction of sacred time. The equipment used in these ceremonies combined authentic religious items with objects specifically designed for occult purposes. Chalices stolen from churches would be used alongside specially crafted black candles. Traditional liturgical vestments might be worn backwards or inside out. Grimoires, books of magical instructions, provided the textual basis for rituals, while practical items like knives, censers for burning incense, and containers for blood or other substances completed the ceremonial apparatus. The language of the ceremonies drew from multiple sources, creating a syncretic magical tradition that combined elements of Catholic liturgy, folkloric magic, and demonological texts. Latin phrases from the Mass would be interspersed with invocations of demons, drawn from grimoires, like the Key of Solomon or the Grimorium Verum. Some practitioners developed their own magical languages, claiming they represented ancient or demonic tongues, though in reality they were likely invented to impress clients with an aura of esoteric knowledge. While much of the Black Mass represented theatrical performance designed to impress clients, certain elements had practical purposes beyond mere spectacle. The use of narcotics in incense or ritual drinks induced altered states of consciousness that enhanced suggestibility and created experiences that participants interpreted as supernatural. Sexual elements of the ceremony stimulated emotional responses that reinforced the psychological impact. Even the collection of bodily materials during rituals provided practitioners with tools for subsequent blackmail if clients later threatened exposure. The investigation of these ceremonies presented La Reine with unprecedented challenges. Physical evidence rarely survived, as practitioners carefully disposed of ritual materials after use. Testimony about events often came solely from participants who had reasons to either exaggerate or minimize what had occurred. The line between actual practice and folkloric belief about what should happen in such ceremonies frequently blurred in witness accounts, making it difficult to determine precisely what had transpired in specific instances. Despite these evidentiary challenges, the consistency of testimony from various witnesses convinced La Reine that black masses and similar ceremonies had indeed occurred. His meticulous cross-referencing of statements from different suspects, arrested at different times and questioned separately, revealed patterns too consistent to be coincidental invention. The details of ritual practice, the locations used, and the clients served aligned across multiple testimonies, suggesting a core of truth beneath potential exaggerations. The social implications of these revelations proved even more challenging than the evidentiary ones. The Black Mass represented a complete inversion of the religious and moral order upon which Louis XIV's absolute monarchy was built. The king ruled by divine right, positioning himself as God's representative on earth and defender of the Catholic faith. The discovery that those closest to him had participated in ceremonies explicitly honoring Satan created a fundamental contradiction that threatened the ideological foundations of his regime. More practically, the association of prominent nobles with infanticide and demonic invocation risked undermining public faith in the aristocracy as a governing class. While peasants might accept their subordinate position when nobility represented divine order and moral leadership, revelations of systematic Satanism and child murder could provoke dangerous questions about the legitimacy of the entire social hierarchy. In an era still haunted by memories of the Fronde rebellions, Louis had reason to fear the political consequences of such revelations. The king's response to these discoveries reflected his conflicted position. As an absolute monarch responsible before God for maintaining moral order, he could not simply ignore evidence of such profound transgressions. Yet as a practical ruler concerned with stability, he recognized the danger of allowing the full scope of aristocratic involvement to become public knowledge. His solution, allowing the investigation to proceed while controlling which cases reached public trial, represented a compromise between these competing imperatives. For La Reine, the investigation of the Black Mass represented the most disturbing chapter in an already harrowing case. His personal papers reveal a man deeply troubled by what he discovered, particularly the testimony regarding infanticide. A devout Catholic and loyal servant of the crown, he struggled to reconcile his duty to pursue justice with the political necessity of protecting the monarchy from scandal. The evidence he gathered would remain sealed in royal archives for over a century, its full implications too dangerous for public consumption. The Black Mass, as revealed during the affair of the poisons, represented more than simply criminal activity or religious transgression. It embodied a dark undercurrent in French society, where desperation, ambition, and moral flexibility combined to create a shadow world operating alongside Louis's carefully ordered state. The elaborate ritual practices developed by Lavoisin and her associates revealed both the power and limitations of the Sun King's absolute monarchy, capable of regulating public behavior, but unable to control private belief or desire. As the investigation proceeded toward its climax, the evidence of these dark ceremonies would force Louis XIV to confront uncomfortable questions about the moral character of his court and the implications for his divine right monarchy. The decisions he made in response would shape not only the outcome of the affair of the poisons, but also the future development of French judicial procedure and the relationship between the monarchy and those closest to the throne. The most politically explosive dimension of the affair of the poisons was undoubtedly the direct connection to Versailles and the royal court. As La Reynie's investigation progressed, the evidence increasingly implicated individuals who moved in the king's immediate circle. These revelations transformed what had begun as a criminal investigation into a potential political crisis that threatened the stability of Louis XIV's carefully constructed regime. The king now faced the uncomfortable reality that the poison network's tendrils had reached into the very heart of his government. Versailles, in the 1670s, represented far more than merely the king's residence. Louis had deliberately transformed the palace into the physical embodiment of his absolute monarchy, a controlled environment where nobles competed for royal favor under his watchful eye. By requiring aristocrats to spend much of their time at court, Louis had effectively neutralized their independent political power, redirecting their energies toward ceremonial functions and the pursuit of royal patronage. This strategy maintained stability, but also created an intensely competitive atmosphere where favor meant everything and disfavor could mean ruin. Within this hothouse environment, factions formed around powerful figures, particularly the king's successive mistresses. The royal bed was not merely a site of pleasure, but a locus of political influence. The woman who shared it gained unprecedented access to the monarch, the ability to influence appointments and patronage, and control over who could reach the king in his most private moments. For ambitious courtiers, attaching oneself to the right royal favorite could make or break a career, while for women with limited formal political outlets, becoming that favorite represented perhaps the highest achievement possible. Françoise Athénaï, Marquise de Montespan, had risen to the position of maîtresse en titre, official mistress, in 1667, displacing Louise de la Vallière. Born to the noble house of Rochechouart, Athénaïs had married the Marquis de Montespan in 1663, entering court as one of the Queen's ladies-in-waiting. Contemporaries described her as strikingly beautiful, with wit and conversational brilliance that captivated the king. By all accounts, Louis became genuinely enamored with her, beginning an affair that would last over a decade and produce 7 children, all of whom Louis would eventually legitimize. Montespan's ascension represented not merely a personal triumph, but the elevation of her entire faction at court. Her brother, the Duke of Vivonne, received military commands and governmental positions. Friends and supporters gained appointments and pensions. Even her husband, paradoxically, benefited initially through royal favor, though he later fell from grace after publicly objecting to his wife's relationship with the king. The Montespan faction became a dominant force in court politics, controlling access to the king and influencing significant decisions. The most explosive allegations in the affair of the poisons centered on Montespan's supposed efforts to gain and maintain the king's affections through supernatural means. According to testimony from multiple sources, including of Voisin's daughter and the Abbé Guibord, Montespan had first approached the fortune teller around 1667 when she sought to win Louis away from La Vallière. The initial consultations allegedly involved relatively benign love magic, including powders to be sprinkled in the king's food or placed in his clothing. As her relationship with Louis progressed, Montespan supposedly continued to employ magical assistants to maintain her position, particularly as younger rivals appeared at court. The ceremonies grew increasingly elaborate and sinister, culminating in the black masses where Montespan herself allegedly served as the altar, lying naked while Guibourg performed blasphemous rituals over her body. The petitions read during these ceremonies explicitly requested the king's continued love and the elimination of rivals for his affections. Most disturbingly, testimony suggested that Montespan had purchased love powders to be administered to the king, substances that modern analysis suggests may have contained Spanish fly, cantharides, a dangerous substance that can cause urinary tract inflammation and increased blood flow to the genitals, along with potentially lethal side effects if improperly dosed. Whether these powders were ever successfully administered to Louis remains unclear, though the king did suffer several mysterious illnesses during the period in question. The allegations against Montespan presented Louis with an unprecedented dilemma. She was not merely his mistress, but the mother of his children, several of whom he had legitimized and intended for significant roles in the state. The public revelation that the king's chosen consort had participated in satanic rituals and possibly attempted to poison him would be politically devastating, undermining faith in royal judgment and potentially destabilizing the carefully maintained image of divine right monarchy that Louis had cultivated. Moreover, Montespan was merely the most prominent of many courtiers implicated in the scandal. The Countess of Soissons, Olympe Mancini, had been one of Louis's early romantic interests before her marriage, and remained an influential figure at court. The Duchess of Bouillon, Marie-Anne Mancini, was another powerful aristocrat, whose husband held significant military commands. The Duke of Luxembourg was one of France's most accomplished military commanders. All of these figures stood accused of patronizing La Voisin and her associates for various magical services. The involvement of the Mancini sisters, nieces of the late Cardinal Mazarin, who had served as Louis's chief minister during his minority, held particular significance. Their uncle had effectively ruled France during the king's youth, accumulating enormous wealth and power. The implication of his nieces in a poisoning scandal suggested the corruption of even those families most intimately connected with royal authority. For Louis, who had worked to establish his personal rule after Mazarin's death, these revelations may have seemed a posthumous vindication of his decision to govern without a principal minister. When La Reynie brought the accusations against Montespan to Louis's attention, the king's reaction combined personal shock with political calculation. According to contemporary accounts, he met privately with La Reynie, questioning him extensively about the evidence and the reliability of the witnesses. While no record exists of Louis's exact words, his subsequent actions suggest a ruler struggling to balance justice with political necessity and perhaps personal feelings for a woman who had been his companion for over a decade. The solution Louis devised reflected this balance. He ordered La Reynie to continue the investigation, but established new protocols for handling evidence involving members of the court. Testimony implicating individuals of high rank would be reported directly to him through written memoranda prepared by La Reynie and reviewed by Louis alone. The king would then decide personally which cases would proceed to the Chambre Ardente and which would be handled through other means. This procedure allowed Louis to maintain control over politically sensitive aspects of the investigation, while ensuring that the criminal network itself would be dismantled. In practice, this meant that while lower-level practitioners faced public trial and execution, aristocratic clients often received more discreet punishments. The Countess of Soissons chose exile rather than face questioning, fleeing to Brussels with the king's tacit permission. The Duchess of Bouillon faced interrogation, but managed to treat the proceedings with aristocratic disdain, supposedly asking one of the judges if he had ever seen the devil, and, upon his negative reply, remarking that it was a pity, as he was a handsome young man. After this performance, she was merely banished to the provinces rather than imprisoned. The Duke of Luxembourg spent several months in the Bastille, but was eventually released and restored to royal favor, later leading French armies to victory in the War of the Grand Alliance. His relatively mild treatment likely reflected both his military value to the state and the comparatively minor nature of his involvement with the occult practitioners. According to testimony, he had sought magical assistance in military matters, rather than participating in the more blasphemous ceremonies or purchasing poisons. As for Montespan herself, no formal action was ever taken against her, though her position at court gradually declined following the scandal. By 1680, Louis had begun to show interest in other women, particularly Marie-Angélique d'Escorval, Duchess of Fontanges, a young beauty who briefly became his mistress before her untimely death in 1681. The exact nature of Fontanges' death, following a miscarriage and mysterious illness, would later generate rumors of poisoning, though no direct evidence implicated Montespan. By 1691, Montespan had been effectively displaced in the king's affections by Françoise d'Aubigné, Marquise de Maintenon, the former governess of Montespan's children with the king. Ironically, Maintenon had been introduced to court by Montespan herself. The transition from Montespan to Maintenon represented not merely a change in romantic partners, but a significant shift in court culture. Where Montespan had embodied the worldly, libertine aspects of Louis's court, Maintenon promoted piety and restraint, influencing the king toward greater religious observance in his later years. While multiple factors contributed to Montespan's fall from favor, the shadow of the poison affair undoubtedly played a significant role. Although Louis never publicly acknowledged the accusations against her, the testimony collected by La Reynie had apparently made a deep impression. According to some accounts, the king became increasingly cautious about food and drink prepared for him, insisting on elaborate precautions against poisoning. He also reportedly avoided being alone with Montespan, ensuring that servants were always present during their interactions. Beyond the case of Montespan, the investigation revealed the extent to which supernatural practices had permeated court culture. Many aristocrats, both male and female, regularly consulted fortune-tellers, astrologers, and other occult practitioners. These consultations ranged from innocuous curiosity about the future to more sinister requests involving love magic, curses against enemies, or even murder. The widespread nature of these activities suggested a profound gap between the public Catholic piety Louis demanded at court and the private beliefs and behaviors of many courtiers. This gap reflected broader tensions in late 17th century French culture. The period represented a transitional moment between medieval belief systems and Enlightenment rationality. Many educated nobles simultaneously embraced aspects of the new scientific thinking while maintaining older beliefs in astrology, alchemy, and magical efficacy. The court physician to Louis XIV might conduct groundbreaking anatomical research while still prescribing remedies based on humoral theory and astrological timing. This intellectual inconsistency created space for practitioners like Lavoisin to operate at the intersection of science, superstition, and criminality. Court politics provided fertile ground for occult practitioners, through its combination of intense competition and limited legitimate avenues for advancement, particularly for women. Female courtiers could exercise formal power only through male relatives, making the pursuit of informal influence through romantic relationships a practical necessity for many ambitious women. When conventional beauty, wit, or political connections proved insufficient to secure such relationships, supernatural assistance might seem a reasonable alternative. For male courtiers, supernatural means offered potential shortcuts to military glory, political office, or royal favor. In a system where advancement depended more on personal relationships than objective merit, magical practices promised to influence the invisible forces that seemingly determine success or failure at court. Even those skeptical of supernatural efficacy might participate in occult rituals as a form of psychological reassurance, or simply to leave no potential advantage unexplored in the cutthroat environment of Versailles. The king's own position regarding magic and superstition appears to have been complex. Louis cultivated an image of rational absolutism, positioning himself as a modern monarch governing through bureaucratic systems rather than arbitrary whim. Yet he also embraced the mystical aspects of royal authority, particularly the belief in the king's divine healing touch. The traditional ceremony in which French monarchs touched those suffering from scrofula, a form of tuberculosis, continued throughout his reign, combining Catholic ritual with essentially magical beliefs about royal power. This duality in Louis's approach to supernatural matters likely influenced his handling of the poison affair. While genuinely committed to eradicating criminal practices, he may have been more ambivalent about the magical elements that many courtiers believed in. The line between acceptable religious devotion, including prayers for specific outcomes, and unacceptable magical practices remained blurry in 17th century thought. Even the most orthodox Catholics might use blessed objects for protection in ways that functionally resembled magical talismans. As the investigation threatened to implicate more members of the court, the political implications became increasingly concerning. Louis had spent decades constructing an image of Versailles as the center of European civilization, a model of refinement and cultural superiority. The revelation that this glittering world harbored practitioners of infanticide and satanic ritual would provide powerful ammunition to foreign propagandists already eager to portray his regime as corrupt and tyrannical. Moreover, the investigation risked destabilizing the delicate balance of faction and favor that Louis had established at court. The king deliberately maintained competing groups of courtiers, preventing any single faction from becoming too powerful by distributing his favor judiciously among various nobles. If one major faction became tainted by association with the scandal, the entire system might be thrown into disarray, potentially reviving the type of aristocratic factionalism that had threatened royal authority during the Fronde rebellions of Louis's youth. Diplomatic considerations also influenced the king's approach to the scandal. France, in the late 1670s, was engaged in complex negotiations following the Dutch War, seeking to consolidate territorial gains while managing tensions with other European powers. Louis's representatives abroad reported that foreign courts were following the poison affair with great interest, ready to exploit any sign of weakness or internal disorder. The king needed to demonstrate his commitment to justice while avoiding revelations that might undermine France's international position. By July 1682, the investigation had reached a critical juncture. Most of the active criminal network had been dismantled, with key figures like Lavoisin executed or imprisoned. Yet, the process of following evidence to its logical conclusion threatened to implicate ever more prominent individuals. François-Michel Le Tellier, Marquis de Louvois and Minister of War, presented Louis with a comprehensive assessment of the political risks posed by continuing the investigation. He argued that further revelations would do more damage to the monarchy than the crimes themselves. Louis, after careful consideration, largely accepted this advice, In July 1682, he formally dissolved the Chambre Ardente, ending the special legal regime that had governed the investigation for 3 years. He ordered the most sensitive documents sealed and placed in his personal archives, where they would remain inaccessible for centuries. Ongoing cases were transferred to regular courts, while some suspects were dealt with through letters de cachet, royal warrants that allowed indefinite imprisonment without trial. The decision to curtail the investigation reflected Louis's pragmatic balancing of justice against political necessity. While genuinely committed to eradicating the poison trade, he recognized that a complete accounting would implicate too many people essential to his government. By allowing La Reynie to dismantle the operational infrastructure of the network while shielding certain highly placed individuals from public exposure, Louis maintained both the reality and appearance of royal justice while avoiding a potentially destabilizing scandal. For the remainder of Louis's reign, the affair of the poisons became an unmentionable subject at court. Those who had been implicated but spared public punishment understood that their continued safety depended on absolute discretion. The king never publicly acknowledged the full scope of the scandal or the evidence against those closest to him. Yet, the affair had lasting effects on court culture, contributing to the more austere and religiously observant atmosphere that characterized the later decades of Louis's rule. The sealed records of the investigation would remain largely inaccessible until the French Revolution, when revolutionaries eager to expose the corruption of the ancient regime rediscovered the dossiers that Louis had hidden away. By then, a century would have passed, and the affair of the poisons would seem like a distant nightmare from a more superstitious age. Yet, the fundamental questions it raised about the relationship between power, morality, and justice would remain relevant long after the poisoners of Versailles had entered the realm of historical footnote. The trials associated with the affair of the poisons represented an extraordinary chapter in French legal history. The Chambre Ardente operated not as a standard criminal court, but as a special tribunal with exceptional powers granted directly by the king. Its procedures bypassed many traditional protections afforded defendants under ordinary French law, reflecting both the seriousness of the crimes under investigation and Louis XIV's determination to eradicate the poison network completely. The tribunal's very name, the burning chamber, evoked both its black-draped, torch-lit meeting room and the fiery fate awaiting many of those who appeared before it. The legal basis for the Chambre Ardente lay in the king's absolute authority as the font of all justice in France. While ordinary courts operated according to established legal codes and precedents, special tribunals created by royal commission could establish their own procedures. Louis appointed trusted officials to serve as judges, including state councillors and masters of requests drawn from the highest levels of the royal administration. These men owed their positions directly to the king and understood that their mandate was to address a specific threat to public order rather than to engage in abstract legal theorizing. The tribunal followed an inquisitorial rather than adversarial procedure, with judges actively investigating crimes rather than merely evaluating evidence presented by competing parties. Defendants had no right to legal representation and often learned the specific charges against them only when they appeared for questioning. Sessions were conducted in absolute secrecy, with judges sworn to confidentiality regarding the proceedings. Records were kept meticulously, but access to them remained strictly controlled, with only the king and his designated ministers permitted to review sensitive testimony. Most significantly, the Chambre Ardente could authorize judicial torture as an investigative technique rather than merely as punishment following conviction. The legal theory underlying torture reflected medieval concepts of proof, which required either confession or testimony from 2 eyewitnesses for conviction in capital cases. Since poisoning and magical practices typically occurred in secret without witnesses, torture provided a means to extract the necessary confession. The law recognized that torture produced unreliable testimony, but this concern was outweighed by the desire to ensure that guilty parties did not escape punishment due to evidentiary technicalities. The primary torture methods employed during the investigation included the question ordinaire and question extraordinaire. The question ordinaire involved the brodequins, wooden boards placed on either side of the legs and slowly tightened with cords until the bones began to crack. The question extraordinaire employed water torture, in which the victim was tied to a trestle, forced to swallow large quantities of water, and then pressed to induce agonizing distension. Both procedures followed strict protocols, with a court official recording every question, response, and application of increased pressure. The first significant trials emerging from La Rainey's investigation involved lower-level practitioners like Marie Bosse and Marie Vigoureux, who were arrested in early 1679. Their interrogations followed a pattern that would become standard throughout the proceedings. Initial questioning focused on their own activities, gradually expanding to identify associates and clients. As pressure increased through isolation, sleep deprivation, and eventually torture, most defendants provided increasingly detailed confessions, implicating others in the network. The trial of Lavoisin herself represented a pivotal moment in the proceedings. Arrested on March 12, 1679, following testimony from Marie Bosse, Catherine Deschays initially maintained her innocence, admitting only to fortune-telling and other harmless practices. Unlike many defendants, she demonstrated remarkable psychological resilience, maintaining her composure even under torture. Only after weeks of interrogation and confrontation with testimony from her associates did she begin to reveal details of her operation, carefully modulating her confessions to protect high-ranking clients. Lavoisin's final confession, extracted under torture, acknowledged her role in providing poisons and arranging black masses, but remained selective in naming clients. She admitted to infanticide and sacrilege while attempting to limit aristocratic exposure. Her strategic approach reflected an understanding of the political dimensions of the case, perhaps hoping that by shielding powerful figures, she might yet secure mercy for herself. If this was her calculation, it proved mistaken. On February 22, 1680, the Chambre Ardente condemned her to death. The execution of Lavoisin occurred at the Place de Grève, Paris's traditional execution ground, near the Hôtel de Ville. Executions in 17th century France functioned not merely as punishment but as public spectacle and moral instruction. Thousands gathered to witness Lavoisin's final moments, creating a carnival-like atmosphere that belied the grim proceedings at its center. Vendors sold souvenirs and refreshments. Makeshift grandstands offered premium viewing for those willing to pay, and balladeers composed songs commemorating the event that would be sung in Paris taverns for years afterward. The execution followed elaborate protocols designed to maximize both physical suffering and public impact. Lavoisin was first subjected to amende honorable, a ritual of public humiliation in which the condemned, dressed in a simple shift and holding a heavy wax candle, was taken to the entrance of Notre Dame Cathedral to beg forgiveness from God, the King, and justice. From there, she proceeded to the Place de Grève, where a confessional awaited for a final opportunity to unburden her soul before meeting her maker. Contemporary accounts describe Lavoisin as maintaining remarkable composure throughout this ordeal. Upon reaching the execution site, she was bound to a stake atop a pyre of wood. The sentence specified that she should be strangled before burning, a relative mercy compared to being burned alive. But witnesses reported that the executioner bungled this step, resulting in Lavoisin experiencing the flames while still conscious. Her ashes were scattered afterward, denying her any final resting place and symbolically erasing her from the community of the dead as well as the living. Following Lavoisin's execution, the trials continued with her associates. Her daughter, Marguerite Montboissin, provided particularly damaging testimony about aristocratic clients, perhaps motivated by a desire for revenge against those who had abandoned her mother to her fate. Marguerite described in detail the black masses allegedly performed for Madame de Montespan, including the sacrifice of infants and the creation of love potions intended for the king. Despite the seriousness of her own involvement, Marguerite eventually received a sentence of permanent confinement in a convent rather than execution. Etienne Guibourg, the elderly defrocked priest who had performed many of the black masses, faced extensive interrogation regarding these ceremonies. Under torture, he provided detailed descriptions of rituals conducted over the naked bodies of women, using consecrated hosts and the blood of sacrificed infants. His testimony directly implicated numerous aristocratic clients, creating significant political complications for Louis and his ministers. Despite his central role in the most blasphemous aspects of the affair, Guibourg died in prison in 1683 before a final sentence could be carried out. Adam Lesage, Lavoisin's former lover and accomplice, attempted to save himself by providing exhaustive testimony about magical ceremonies and aristocratic clients. His strategy proved partially successful. Though initially sentenced to the galleys, he later secured a commutation to exile, eventually returning to France and living into old age. His case illustrated the potential benefits of cooperation, though such leniency remained rare for those deeply implicated in the network's most serious crimes. The patterns of sentencing revealed clear disparities based on social class and political connections. Of the 218 individuals imprisoned during the investigation, the 36 who received death sentences came almost exclusively from the lower social orders. Those executed included poison vendors, fortune tellers, rogue priests who had performed sacrilegious ceremonies, and accomplices who had facilitated contact between practitioners and clients. Their executions typically involved public spectacle, with death by hanging, beheading, or burning, depending on the specific crimes. For aristocratic clients, consequences varied significantly based on political considerations rather than legal culpability. Some faced brief questioning followed by quiet restoration to their positions. Others received orders of temporary exile from Paris, allowing the scandal to subside before their discreet return. In the most serious cases, aristocrats might be imprisoned in the Bastille or other royal fortresses, but these incarcerations typically lasted months rather than years and involved comfortable accommodations befitting their status. The Duchess of Bouillon, Marie-Anne Mancini, exemplified the privileged treatment afforded to high-ranking defendants. Summoned before the tribunal for questioning regarding consultations with Lavoisin, she arrived at the arsenal in a coach drawn by 6 horses, accompanied by her husband and numerous supporters from prominent noble families. Throughout her interrogation, she maintained an attitude of aristocratic disdain, treating the proceedings as beneath her dignity. When asked if she had ever seen the devil, she reportedly replied that she was seeing him at that very moment, looking at the judge. Her punishment consisted merely of exile to the provinces, a penalty soon lifted through political intervention. The Countess of Soissons, Olympe Mancini, chose to flee rather than face questioning. When informed that she would be summoned before the tribunal, she sought private audience with the king. Louis supposedly told her that if she were innocent, she should remain and face questioning, but if guilty, she might wish to leave France. Understanding this tacit permission to escape, she departed immediately for Brussels, never to return during Louis' lifetime. This arrangement allowed the king to maintain the appearance of justice while avoiding the political complications of a public trial for a woman who had once been his intimate companion. The Duke of Luxembourg, François-Henri de Montmorency, represented an intermediate case. As one of France's most capable military commanders, his services remained valuable to the state despite his alleged involvement with occult practitioners. Arrested and confined to the Bastille for several months in 1680, he faced questioning regarding magical ceremonies intended to advance his military career. Unlike many aristocratic defendants, he endured a period of genuine confinement, though in conditions far more comfortable than common prisoners experienced. Eventually released without formal charges, he later returned to royal favor, leading French armies to victory in subsequent campaigns. For defendants of modest status, the mechanisms of justice operated with brutal efficiency. Marie Bosse and Marie Vigoureux, the fortune tellers whose arrests had initiated the broader investigation, were convicted and burned at the stake in early 1679. La Chaboissière, who had assisted La Voisin in disposing of infant bodies, was broken on the wheel, a particularly agonizing execution method reserved for egregious crimes. Numerous minor figures in the network were hanged, with their bodies afterward displayed at Montfaucon, the notorious gibbet on Paris's outskirts, where decomposing corpses served as a grim warning to others contemplating similar crimes. The trials also revealed the limits of 17th century justice when confronting widespread criminal conspiracy. The compartmentalized nature of the poison network meant that many participants knew only their immediate contacts, limiting their ability to implicate others even under torture. Some suspects died in prison before full confessions could be extracted. Others provided testimony that could not be corroborated, raising questions about reliability, particularly when statements had been obtained through torture. The absence of forensic methods to detect poisons or verify claims about magical practices further complicated the pursuit of justice. Public reaction to the trials evolved as the proceedings continued. Initial responses combined horror at the crimes with satisfaction that justice was being done. As the investigation expanded to implicate aristocrats, however, public opinion became more complex. For many commoners, the affair confirmed suspicions about corruption and immorality among the nobility. Satirical songs and pamphlets circulated in Paris, mocking implicated courtiers and questioning whether true justice would extend to those of high rank. Within aristocratic circles, the trials created an atmosphere of paranoia and mutual suspicion. Court factions exploited the situation to undermine rivals, suggesting connections to the poison network as a means of discrediting enemies. Those who had consulted fortune tellers or purchased seemingly harmless love potions suddenly faced potential association with infanticide and Satanism. The distinction between acceptable and unacceptable forms of supernatural assistance became blurred, leaving many courtiers uncertain about their own legal vulnerability. Religious authorities responded to the affair with renewed emphasis on Orthodox Catholic practice and intensified campaigns against superstition. The Archbishop of Paris issued pastoral letters condemning occult practices and warning the faithful against consulting fortune tellers or purchasing magical remedies. Parish priests received instructions to preach against superstition and to report suspicious activities in their communities. Missionary efforts intensified in rural areas where folk magical practices remained deeply embedded in local culture. For the legal system, the affair of the poisons highlighted both the effectiveness and limitations of exceptional tribunals. The Chambre Ardente had successfully dismantled a major criminal network operating in the capital, yet its procedures raised troubling questions about due process and the reliability of evidence obtained through torture. The experience would influence subsequent legal reforms under Louis XIV, particularly regarding the regulation of evidence and the standardization of judicial procedures throughout France. By the time Louis dissolved the Chambre Ardente in July 1682, the immediate threat posed by the poison network had been largely eliminated. The principal practitioners had been executed or imprisoned. Regulations governing the sale of toxic substances had been strengthened, and public awareness of the dangers had increased substantially. Yet the king's decision to seal the most sensitive records and transfer remaining cases to regular courts left many questions unanswered and numerous suspected participants unpunished. This incomplete resolution reflected the fundamental tension in Louis's approach to the affair. As an absolute monarch claiming divine sanction, he could not ignore evidence of such profound transgressions against both secular and religious law. Yet, as a practical ruler concerned with stability, he recognized the danger of allowing aristocratic involvement to become fully public. The compromise he reached, punishing the network's operational elements while protecting most of its elite clients, represented a pragmatic but morally ambiguous solution to an unprecedented threat to his regime. The legacy of these trials would extend far beyond their immediate outcomes. The detailed records compiled by La Reynie established precedents for modern police work, while the specialized tribunal, with its emphasis on professional judges rather than aristocratic amateurs, represented an important step toward a rationalized judicial system. Even the controversial use of torture was subjected to bureaucratic procedures that, paradoxically, reflected the emerging modern state's attempt to regulate the application of violence, rather than employing it arbitrarily. More broadly, the affair of the poisons marked a crucial moment in the evolution of Louis XIV's absolute monarchy, revealing both the extent and limits of his power. The king could establish extraordinary tribunals and personally decide which cases would proceed, yet even the Sun King found himself constrained by political necessity and the practical impossibility of pursuing justice without regard for consequences. In this respect, the affair exposed the contradiction at the heart of absolutism, a system of theoretically unlimited power that in practice operated through careful negotiation with social and political realities. On July 21, 1682, Louis XIV signed an edict that abruptly concluded one of the most extraordinary criminal investigations in French history. With a stroke of his pen, the king dissolved the Chambre Ardente, ending its 3-year mission to root out poisoners and practitioners of black magic from Parisian society. The tribunal that had examined hundreds of suspects issued dozens of death sentences and threatened to implicate the highest members of the aristocracy simply ceased to exist. Ongoing cases were transferred to regular courts, while the most sensitive documents were sealed and placed in the king's personal archives, where they would remain hidden from public view for more than a century. The decision to terminate the investigation reflected Louis's pragmatic assessment that its continuation posed greater risks than its crimes. François-Michel Letellier, Marquis de Louvois, and Minister of War, had presented the king with a comprehensive analysis of the political dangers inherent in allowing the investigation to proceed to its logical conclusion. According to contemporary accounts, Louvois argued that further revelations would undermine public faith in the nobility as a governing class and provide ammunition to foreign propagandists already eager to portray the French court as corrupt and decadent. These concerns were far from theoretical. By 1682, France occupied a precarious position in European politics. The aggressive expansionism of Louis's earlier years had created a ring of hostile neighbors suspicious of French intentions. Dutch and English pamphleteers already portrayed the Sun King as a power-hungry tyrant, threatening the liberty of Europe. Revelations that his court harbored practitioners of infanticide and satanic ritual would only reinforce this negative image, potentially encouraging foreign powers to form anti-French coalitions. Domestically, the affair threatened to revive dangerous questions about aristocratic privilege that Louis had spent decades suppressing. The king's careful reconstruction of the monarchy, following the Fronde rebellions of his youth, had depended on transforming independent nobles into loyal courtiers dependent on royal favor. Exposing too many aristocrats as criminals risked undermining the system, potentially rekindling the anti-noble sentiment that had fueled earlier unrest. For a king whose governing philosophy centered on stability and control, Such risks outweighed the satisfaction of complete justice. Moreover, the investigation had already achieved its primary practical objective: dismantling the operational infrastructure of the poison network. Lavoisin and most of her key associates had been executed or imprisoned. New regulations governing the sale of toxic substances had been implemented. The public had been thoroughly educated about the dangers posed by seemingly innocuous fortune tellers and potion vendors. With the immediate threat neutralized, Louis could reasonably conclude that the marginal benefits of continued investigation no longer justified its political costs. The statistics of the affair painted a grim picture of how deeply poison and black magic had penetrated Parisian society. Between 1679 and 1682, the Chambre Ardente had examined 442 individuals and issued 367 arrest warrants. Of those brought before the court, 218 were imprisoned, 36 were executed, and 5 were sentenced to life as galley slaves. Others received lesser punishments ranging from banishment to public penance. Some suspects died in prison awaiting trial, while others received royal pardons, typically due to political considerations rather than questions of guilt. These numbers, however, captured only those cases formally processed by the tribunal. La Reynie's investigation had implicated over 1,000 individuals in purchasing or administering poisons, though many cases involved love potions or abortifacients rather than murder weapons. Hundreds of these individuals escaped formal prosecution when the investigation was terminated, their cases sealed in the archived records. Others fled France rather than face questioning, establishing exile communities in neighboring countries that would persist for decades. Beyond the immediate judicial outcomes, the affair of the poisons left lasting marks on French society and institutions. For the emerging Parisian police force under La Reynie, the investigation provided valuable experience in modern law enforcement techniques. The meticulous documentation of criminal networks, systematic gathering of evidence, and creation of comprehensive case files established precedents that would influence European policing for centuries. La Reynie himself continued as Lieutenant General of Police until 1697, implementing numerous reforms to prevent the re-emergence of similar criminal enterprises. The affair prompted significant changes in the regulation of potentially dangerous substances and practices. New laws restricted the sale of arsenic, antimony, and other toxic compounds, requiring purchasers to register their identities and intended uses. Apothecaries and herbalists faced regular inspections to ensure compliance with these regulations. Fortune tellers and other occult practitioners came under increased surveillance, with those suspected of expanding into more dangerous territory quickly shut down. These measures represented early examples of the preventive policing that would become a hallmark of modern law enforcement. Religious authorities responded to the affair with intensified campaigns against superstition and unorthodox practices. The Archbishop of Paris issued pastoral letters condemning occult consultations and magical remedies as gateways to more serious spiritual corruption. Parish priests received instructions to preach against superstition and to report suspicious activities in their communities. Missionary efforts targeted areas where folk magical traditions remained deeply embedded in local culture, seeking to replace these practices with Orthodox Catholic devotions. For the legal system, the affair of the poisons highlighted both the effectiveness and limitations of exceptional tribunals. The Chambre Ardente had successfully addressed an extraordinary threat to public safety, yet its procedures raised troubling questions about due process and the reliability of evidence obtained through torture. The experience would influence subsequent legal reforms under Louis XIV, particularly regarding the standardization of judicial procedures throughout France and the gradual shift toward more rational approaches to evidence. Court culture at Versailles underwent subtle but significant changes following the scandal. The libertine atmosphere that had characterized the early decades of Louis's personal rule gave way to a more austere and religiously observant environment. This transformation resulted from multiple factors, including the king's advancing age and personal evolution. But the shadow of the poison affair undoubtedly played a role. The revelation that occult practices had penetrated his inner circle seems to have prompted Louis to emphasize orthodox piety more strongly in his later years. Madame de Montespan, whose alleged involvement represented the most politically explosive dimension of the affair, never faced formal charges, but gradually lost her position as royal favorite. By 1691, she had been effectively displaced by the piously religious Madame de Maintenon, whom Louis secretly married following the death of Queen Marie-Thérèse in 1683. This transition symbolized the cultural shift at court, as Maintenon promoted moral restraint and religious devotion, in contrast to the worldly splendor Montespan had embodied. Though never publicly disgraced, Montespan retreated from court life, eventually finding solace in religious charitable works before her death in 1707. For ordinary Parisians, the affair left a complex legacy of fascination and fear. The spectacular public executions of Lavoisin and her associates entered popular memory, inspiring songs, stories, and eventually plays that would keep the events alive in public consciousness. Fortune-telling and love magic continued to attract clients despite increased regulation, though practitioners became more cautious about expanding into more dangerous territory. The affair demonstrated both the effectiveness of state power in suppressing crime and its limitations in changing deeply rooted cultural practices. The historical record of the affair of the poisons remained incomplete for centuries due to Louis's decision to seal the most sensitive documents. When these records were finally opened during the French Revolution, they provided a unique window into the hidden dimensions of 17th century society. Modern historians continue to debate the reliability of testimony extracted under torture and the extent to which accusations of infanticide and satanic ritual reflected actual practice versus cultural anxieties projected onto marginalized practitioners. Regardless of these historical uncertainties, the affair unquestionably revealed profound contradictions within Louis XIV's France. The sophisticated court culture, celebrated by official propaganda, coexisted with persistent belief in magical efficacy across all social classes. The Catholic monarchy that positioned itself as defender of orthodoxy harbored courtiers who allegedly participated in blasphemous rituals. The absolute royal authority that claimed divine sanction found itself compromised by political necessity when justice threatened to implicate those too powerful to punish openly. These contradictions reflected broader tensions in late 17th century European culture. The period represented a transitional moment between medieval belief systems and Enlightenment rationality, between traditional religious authority and emerging scientific understanding. The poison affair erupted precisely at this historical juncture, exposing the unstable mixture of old and new worldviews that characterized the era. Educated nobles might simultaneously embrace aspects of the new scientific thinking while maintaining older beliefs in astrology, alchemy, and magical efficacy. For women in particular, the affair illuminated the limited options available within rigid social structures. Many female clients of Lavoisin sought supernatural assistance precisely because legitimate avenues for addressing their grievances did not exist. Trapped in arranged marriages, denied legal independence, and valued primarily for their reproductive capacity, some women turned to practitioners who offered alternative, if dangerous, solutions. The gendered dimensions of the affair reflected the broader constraints facing women in a society that offered them few paths to autonomy or self-determination. The political lessons of the affair proved equally significant. Louis's handling of the scandal demonstrated both the extent and limits of absolutist power. He could establish extraordinary tribunals, order arrests without traditional legal protections, and personally decide which cases would proceed. Yet even the Sun King found himself constrained by political necessity and the practical impossibility of pursuing justice without regard for consequences. The affair exposed the fundamental contradiction of absolute monarchy, a system of theoretically unlimited power that in practice operated through careful negotiation with social and political realities. This pragmatic dimension of Louis's absolutism helps explain the regime's remarkable durability. Despite its theoretical rigidity, the system maintained flexibility in practice, allowing the king to balance competing imperatives of justice, stability, and political advantage. By ending the investigation before it could threaten the foundations of his regime, Louis demonstrated the pragmatic intelligence that characterized his most successful governance decisions. He sacrificed complete justice for a more limited but sustainable resolution that preserved the essential structures of his rule. For modern observers, the affair of the poisons offers a fascinating case study in the intersection of crime, belief, and power in early modern Europe. The investigation pulled back the curtain on a shadow world operating alongside official society, revealing how desperation and ambition could drive individuals to transgress fundamental moral and religious boundaries. It demonstrated how easily supernatural beliefs could be exploited by unscrupulous practitioners preying on human vulnerability. Most significantly, it illustrated how justice itself could become entangled with political calculation, creating moral compromises that protected the powerful at the expense of complete accountability. 3.5 centuries later, the affair continues to fascinate because it speaks to universal human concerns. The desire for love, wealth, and power that drove clients to Lavoisin's door remains recognizable across cultures and time periods. The tension between official morality and private transgression that characterized Louis's court exists in every society. The questions the affair raises about the proper limits of state power and the balance between justice and stability remain relevant to contemporary political debates. In the final analysis, the affair of the poisons stands as a dark mirror reflecting the complexities of human nature and social organization. It reveals how the brightest achievements of civilization, represented by the glittering culture of Versailles, can coexist with the darkest impulses of human behavior. It demonstrates how power and vulnerability, superstition and rationality, justice and expedience intertwine in ways that defy simple moral judgments. Most poignantly, it illustrates how even absolute monarchs find themselves constrained by the messy realities of human society, forced to compromise their loftiest principles in the face of practical necessity. Thank you for joining us on this dark journey through one of history's most fascinating scandals. If you've enjoyed this exploration of the affair of the poisons, please consider subscribing to our channel for more deep dives into history's shadowy corners. Leave a comment with your thoughts on Louis XIV's handling of the affair. Was he justified in ending the investigation to protect the monarchy, or should justice have been allowed to run its course regardless of consequences? Until next time, remember that history's darkest chapters often reveal the most about human nature and the societies we create.